All right, our last video clip here will be on the identities of the cranial nerves. And whereas your spinal nerves connect to the spinal cord, the cranial nerves branch off of the brain, the cerebrum itself, or the brain stem. And you have 12 pair of these. And so all of these yellow structures you see here that are connected here to the cerebrum and the brain stem are those cranial nerves. And they exist in 12 pair. And each pair has a name. They're numbered. They're given Roman numeral designations, 1 through 12, which you can see there on your study guide. And then each pair has a particular name. There is a mnemonic device listed in your study guide there that's based on the first letter of each of those 12 pair of cranial nerves and their names that can hopefully help you learn their identity. So I do want you to be able to name these cranial nerves because they will come up for you later in your health sciences classes. So I want you to be familiar with their names, 1 through 12. So if on the test I say name cranial nerve pair number 6, you'll be able to tell me those are your abducens nerves. Or if I said name cranial nerve pair number 12, you'll be able to tell me those are your hypoglossal nerves. And over on the physiology side, we'll talk a little bit about the functions of some of these nerves as well. Now, it would be kind of a pain. They're difficult to, they're difficult to study and try to learn and be able to identify all 12 pairs. So in terms of highlighting and actually expecting you to be able to identify these nerves on a test, I'm going to restrict it to 3 of the pair. And cranial nerve pair number 1, right there and right there, that's a pair that I do want you to be able to identify. So they're the most anterior. Those are your olfactory nerves if you're following along with your lab guide. That's cranial nerve pair number 1. There are some rootlets over here that extend down. Remember the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone, how to have those little holes in it? There are little nerve rootlets that extend. Oh yeah, invisible body actually has those little nerve rootlets shown on here. That's kind of cool. So right in there, see all those little nerve rootlets in there? Those would extend through the cribriform plate down into the roof of the nasal cavity, and those are responsible for your sense of smell. So those are specialized sensory nerve fibers, and they detect different types of odors, impulses, action potentials are generated, and those travel through these olfactory nerves back to the cerebrum. And over on the physiology side, I'm going to point out to you where you have these olfactory centers in the cerebral cortex up in here that deal with your sense of smell. So I do want you to be able to identify that pair of cranial nerves. All right, and then I also want you to be able, let me deselect those. I want you to also be able to identify cranial nerve pair number 2. And let's see, I'm going to have to do some dissection here to get those to show up. Go away. All right, so this view of visible body did not include cranial nerve pair number 2, which are your optic nerves, which extend to your eyes. And so now we took a look when we did the skeletal anatomy. I pointed out to you that around the sella turcica, that little saddle-like feature of the sphenoid bone, where your pituitary gland sits, just above that, the optic nerves crisscross with each other. That's called the optic chiasma. And so the optic nerve that's coming from the left eye crisscrosses over to the right side of the brain, and the optic nerve that's coming from the right eye extends over to the left side of the brain. That means your left side of your brain is receiving visual information from the right eye, and the right side of the brain is receiving visual information from the left eye. And for some reason, visible body did not draw in the optic nerves on this particular view. The only portion that they're showing is right in here. So right in there, that's where the optic chiasma is located, that structure. That's where they crisscross. And so you have an optic nerve over here and an optic nerve over here that crisscross at that location, and then they extend along the bottom of the brain back towards the occipital lobe. And the occipital lobe, as you'll see when over on the physiology side, that's where your visual centers of the brain are located that interpret visual information. So they didn't draw, for some reason they didn't include that on this particular view on visible body, for some bizarre reason, but I've drawn them in for you there. So if I'm highlighting these large cranial nerves that crisscross around the pituitary gland, those are going to be your optic nerves. All right, and so I will take those off. All right, cranial nerve pair number 3, we'll just kind of run through these so that you can see them. Right there and right there. Those are called your oculomotor nerves. Oculo is referring to the eyes. Motor refers to motion. So the nerve fibers that pass through that nerve extend to eye muscles that help out with eye movements. Oops. All right, so that's cranial nerve pair number 3. And then cranial nerve pair number 4, right there. Kind of small, and then right over there on the left-hand side, those are your trochlear cranial nerves. That's cranial nerve pair number 4. They're kind of small, and you can kind of follow, since they're highlighted there in blue, those are also extending toward the eyes, so they also wind up helping to control some of your muscles. You got a lot of little tiny muscles that control your eye movements, which kind of makes sense when you think about it. Your eye has to be able to make very fine, delicate movements. All right, cranial nerve pair number 5. This is a big mama cranial nerve hair right here. Those are called your trigeminal nerves, and tri because it divides up into 3 major branches that extend outward. Some of the branches wind up extending around to the face as well. So that's a big giant pair of cranial nerves, and they are connected. If you notice really closely, they're extending off of the pons portion of the brainstem. All right, so that's cranial nerve pair number 5. Oops, computer's freezing up here on me. All right, then cranial nerve pair number 6. Hang on, my computer's doing some glitches here for me. All right, cranial nerve pair number 6, right there and right there. Those are called your abducens nerves. Okay, and then moving on down farther, we'll deselect those. Cranial nerve pair number 7 on each side. Those are called your facial nerves. Deselect those. And then cranial nerve pair number 8. Those are called your vestibulocochlear nerves. And sometimes they can also be called the acoustic or the auditory nerves, but vestibulocochlear is a better term for those nerves. Vestibulocochlear, because those nerves have axons of sensory neurons in the ears, and some of those are extending from an ear structure that's called the cochlea, and that is responsible for sound detection. All right, so that's where the cochlear part comes from. And then there's another structure in the inner ear called the vestibule, and that is a structure that is responsible for your sense of balance. So there are axons of sensory neurons that are involved in your sense of hearing and also your sense of balance that pass through those vestibulocochlear nerves and connect into the brainstem. And then that information winds up being transmitted to the parts of your brain that deal with sound interpretation. All right, so that's cranial nerve pair number 8. And if we keep kind of zooming in here, cranial nerve pair number, that's 10, 9, right there, and right over there. Those are your glossopharyngeal nerves. Glosso refers to the tongue, so those contain nerve fibers that extend to the tongue. Pharyngeal refers to the pharynx, so that also contains nerve fibers that are going to wind up extending to the pharynx as well. All right, we'll deselect those. Now, cranial nerve pair number 10, I do want you to be able to identify. Those are called your vagus nerves, and I'm going to zoom out here and show you how far down those extend, because you can kind of see highlighted in blue there. The vagus nerves are extending all the way down into your thoracic cavities. And then okay, and then also from there they extend all the way down into the abdominopelvic cavity. And so the vagus nerve actually contains axons of neurons that are involved in your autonomic nervous system, and more specifically the parasympathetic branch of your autonomic nervous system that you'll hear more about over on the physiology side and next semester when you take Biology 202. So those are easy to identify because those are the only cranial nerves that extend that deep or that low in the body. So if I'm highlighting a couple of cranial nerves for you in blue and they extend way, way, way far away from the brain down toward the thoracic and abdominopelvic cavities, then you're going to know I'm highlighting cranial nerve pair number 10. Those are your vagus nerves. All right, and then our last two pair of cranial nerves. So right there, hang on just a second. That's actually cranial nerve pair number 12. Cranial nerve pair number 11 is actually right there, and then these are also parts of it. So they have kind of a weird routing system where they, some of the routing is down in here into the spinal cord, and then it winds up passing through these nerves that extend outward from there toward the neck. So those are called your spinal accessory nerves or accessory nerves. You can call them accessory nerves as well. Either one is fine. And then finally, the last pair of cranial nerves, cranial nerve pair number 12. Let's deselect those. I'll move down here a little bit. Right there and right there. Those are cranial nerve pair number 12, and those are your hypoglossal nerves. So I just wanted to show you where all of those are located. It's easier to see them with something in 3D that you can kind of rotate around. So again, use your study guide. I do want you to know the names of all 12 pair and be able to identify cranial nerve pair number 1, olfactory nerves, cranial nerve pair number 2, your optic nerves, which crisscross at the optic chiasma, and then your vagus nerves, cranial nerve pair number 10. And then we will have a physiology lecture. We'll talk a little bit about some of the functions of the cranial nerves, and you'll need to check your study guides for information you'll need to know about their functions. And so that actually concludes the nervous system anatomy. The mnemonic in your anatomy study guide should help you learn the names, and it's simply, once one takes the anatomy final, very good vacations are happening. And so that can help you learn the names of those 12 pair of cranial nerves. All right, that's going to conclude the anatomy for Unit 5.